The Five Rings Podcast, your weekly amateur sports and Olympic sports show with Duane and Kevin Almaty. And now, without further ado, here's Duane Rollins.
And welcome to frozen cold Canada, Kevin. It's minus 40 here in Toronto today, because we always start with the weather. It's our joke. But this weather's relevant. It's minus bloody 40, which means it's also minus 40 Fahrenheit. It's the magic number where it's the same in Fahrenheit and Celsius. Is it colder there?
It's pretty much the same, maybe minus 32 or 33, but the whole northeastern North America is under freezing, even more than freezing temperature. It's one of the coldest span of a couple of days that I've been experiencing over the last few years, I mean. And you know what happened? During my big winter coat, the zipper broke and I'm stuck with the winter jacket that's not even warm enough, so I'm in deep, deep trouble today.
Oh dear. Stay inside. You have to work though, so yeah, you might want to call in sick, call in cold.
If I make it to the metro, I'll be fine.
All right. For those that don't know, this is the Five Rings Podcast. I am Duane Rollins here in Toronto, Kevin Lemray in Montreal. Day ahead of schedule because we have some scheduling issues with our two solitudes, so we're bumping it around. I also wanted to get the Scotties Tournament of Hearts lineup out there because that event has started, and I wanted to sort of break it down and handicap it today because we did the Briar last week. We did it late last week. We're only a few days apart with this podcast. We're going to get that one out there today. In addition, we're also going to talk about Almaty, about the games no one wants, and the inspection that no one could see. That just happened there. We got an update on our Evan Dunphy, our race walking doping story. We had him on a couple weeks ago. We have a bit of an update there. It looks like maybe there might be some justice coming down. And in the middle segment, we're going to have a little conversation in honor of Flag Day here in Canada. That is, we have days for everything, but it was the 50th anniversary of the Canadian flag, the new flag.
It's surprising, though. When I think about the flag, Duane, I don't realize it's only 50 years old. My parents lived a day where the Canadian flag did not exist.
Yeah, the Red Ensign was what it was called, and it looks very similar to was red, but not blue, but it looked very similar to the style of the New Zealand and Australia flag with the little tiny coat of arms in the top, and then the rest of it was a solid color, very a nod to the British heritage here. But they switched it 50 years ago, so we were going to have a little bit of in honor of that, we're going to have a discussion about our ultimate Canadian flag bearers for our summer and winter games, opening and closing ceremonies, and that is going to be a prelude to doing it for several other countries. Kevin and I have divided up for 3 countries each, and plus the rest of the world, and we're going to have that conversation next week, so you guys, the listeners, can add in with what your choice would be for your ultimate summer and winter flag bearer in the Winter and Summer Olympics. If you live in another country, you can do that at Five Rings Podcast. In the meantime, though, we'll talk Canada this week to tease that out in honor of our 50th flag anniversary. Kevin, in the meantime, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll break down the games no one wants and the inspection no one saw.
On lonely nights I start to fade. On lonely nights I start to fade. Her love's 1,000 miles away. Her love's 1,000 miles away. Memories made in the coldest winter. Goodbye, my friend.
And welcome back. As we said in the intro, Almaty had the inspection happening today. Not a lot of work for the IOC inspectors this time. They only have to go to 2 different places, Almaty and Beijing. Of course, they were in Almaty last week. As we were joking about a couple times, the big issue with this is that we'd love to know more about Almaty. It's like we don't know a lot about it, right? We've talked about that a lot. The inspectors were in there. The journalists were there prepared to cover it, but they only had 5 minutes access to the IOC inspection crew, and they weren't allowed to ask questions.
And part of that 5 minutes was walking beside them, trying to ask questions while they were walking towards their destination. It was obviously part of the protocols of the way the IOC does things was the reason and the explanation given to the journalists why they could not have access like they wanted or have their questions answered. But it did look great, though. If you look at the images that were taken on GamesBid and on AroundTheRings.com, those 2 websites that covered Almaty, that were present in Almaty, the images were stunning. The 25 minutes away from Almaty, you got the Shadola and the Medioma Mountain that will be used for the Olympics if Almaty get them. Those mountains are just the right, perfect size. Not too big, not like the Rockies where it dwarfs the actual track of the Olympic race, but it's really stunning and it's beautiful and it's old infrastructures that could be reused. It will be a little smaller game, so at the end of the day, it might look like what we wanted to see, but it's a shame that we couldn't ask questions about it.
Yeah. The skating arena, where the speed skating and that would take place is very elevated. There's been a lot of world records, Soviet records back in the old Soviet Union were broken there. So it's
highest track in the world, right? The highest
Yeah.
along the speed skating track in the entire world.
Yeah, it's been around since the 50s or something like that. So it's going to take more than a coat of paint.
Yeah.
Paint a coat.
Paint a coat.
Coat, which is a slip that I made yesterday that we got pointed out to by one of our listeners. But anyway, I think we'll just call it a paint a coat. We'll keep going with paint a coat. What do you think?
I think it's it makes us unique.
Yeah, paint a coat. Anyway, so it's going to need more of a paint a coat than maybe it does otherwise. But quickly back to, it's unfortunate that we're not getting more information out of there, and that we're not able to have journalists embedded in these things. If they truly wanted to be transparent, to me, that's the way to do it. I mean, if war zones can have embedded journalists, which obviously is propaganda purposes for that in many cases, but at the same time, why can't, like, the IOC inspection crew have some journalists that are able to be behind the scenes and talk about what they're seeing? What are they afraid of? What are they trying to hide? That's all it says when they don't allow that, right?
They're afraid there's going to have another Brian Williams in the IOC world.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Brian Williams is a very...
He's in trouble, yeah. He's in trouble in NBC right now.
Yeah. I was watching the SNL 40th last night, and there's a lot of jokes about him. But at any rate, this isn't a podcast about that.
No, but it might be a reason. What I mean, it's just that they're trying to control the amount of information, maybe to, in a way, not to people to over-speculate. It's a new 2020 agenda, but it still doesn't look like it's getting implemented. Again, transparency is the one thing people is always clamoring when they're talking about the Olympic bidding process. And so far, we haven't seen any concrete effort toward this, because what we've seen is what we've been told what we're seeing, and that doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, for some reason, and this goes beyond the Olympic movement, the instinct of a lot of institutions when they're talking about increasing transparency is to somehow make it more difficult for media to access them. I don't know how they think that's more transparent. They would probably argue, I guess.
Well,
that,
if they don't tell you something, they can't lie about it. They're just not telling you.
Yeah, they just basically say that it's all they would argue that they're not allowing outside influences to access, I guess. But I don't know. It seems that you need journalists. You need independent voices in there looking at it. But at any rate, it didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. So I don't think we're going to see much better in Beijing, of all places. So
no, Almaty's probably a bet that'll be a little more transparent. But yeah, you can't really take a bet on either side for that.
All right. Well, I was hoping to have a more informed conversation about Almaty today, but unfortunately we didn't get much more other than the pretty pictures. Certainly there is some distinct differences between the two bids. When you talked about the scale, I think Beijing, obviously because it's Beijing and it's China, and we all saw 2008 will be big, will be glamorous, it'll be explosive, but there's a big divide as well. I think geography is the biggest roadblock in that bid. You're talking about 100 plus miles between the alpine events and the arena events. And I don't know whether that's what you want. It's not going to be very accessible for the journalist. Basically, you're going to have to, if you're covering those games as a journalist or you're going as a fan, you're going to have to choose between the alpine events or the regular events. You might be able to do a day, like a day here and a day there, but you're not going to be able to swing back and forth in a single day.
No, but I even heard that there may be talks of, if Beijing get those Olympics, to do a type of high-speed train between those two locations, or some type of high-speed public transport to connect those two dots on the map. And to be honest, that would skyrocket the price of those games. It would make it even more white elephants, because what if that transportation is not needed after? Which is why right now Almaty has not my vote, because I don't have a vote, but has that makes it a good reason. But it's because Almaty seems a bit more romantic, a bit more smaller scale, but just enough to get by. What I mean is the infrastructures will work. They're not going to be the prettiest. Well, it'd be with a nice paint a coat, but they're not going to be the biggest. They're not going to be maybe too much grandiose or extravagant, but to be just enough to what you need. And I think that's what the Olympic movement needs, to just not waste too much money, not waste too many resources, just do enough to get by.
Yeah, and I think people sort of they sort of laugh and look down their nose when Kakistan gets mentioned, and they think of Borak, of course. But ultimately, we have to start to look at this objectively and see whether or not this is the right place to go. Because ultimately, I don't don't like a lot about the Beijing bid. I don't like that it's kind of they're forcing a square peg into the round hole in a lot of ways. It's not a winter sport area. It's just the Chinese government wants another tool of propaganda. Really, is what it comes down to.
Yep.
At any rate, the Kazakhstan bid, I don't know how much better it is either, because that's not exactly the most open and transparent government you have there. But we'll see.
They're making efforts towards that, though. To what they're seeing, what they're talking about. Kazakhstan is opening to the world in the last 15 to 20 years. There's a lot of tourism in the southern part of Kazakhstan. There's some tourist destinations that are really popular in Russia and in the eastern part of Europe that are really popular to go to Kazakhstan for great time. There's beaches in Kazakhstan. People don't really know that. And the cycling world with Team Astana, yes, there's been controversy and doping and all that, yes. But it opened up the world to Kazakhstan in a way, and it's more open than it used to be, and it's a very popular tourist destination. And I think maybe having the games in Kazakhstan would change the perception of people can have in this country. Who knows? That's probably why they're going for those games, but yeah.
It's a double-edged sword of, you can't, when you go into a place of the world that's a little bit closed, the hope is, maybe it's a naive hope, but the hope is that maybe having the world's eye on it will open them up a bit more. I don't know whether that works. I don't know how much proof we have in that. Have we seen much change in terms of access and transparency in China since Beijing? I'm not sure. However, when you're talking about, two beds that have very similar governments in a lot of way, I, as well as you, sort of lean towards, I'm more curious of Almaty than I am of Beijing, because I've seen Beijing and I know what they do. But that said, the Chinese, they would put on a great games. There's no doubt about that in terms of the games themselves. So 2 weeks would be a spectacle. I don't think anyone doubts that.
No, absolutely. It would be probably one of the nicest and more spectacular winter game. But that's the thing. I just can't fathom in my head the winter game being in China of all places, even though China has a lot of winter weather. But it's more, when I think of Beijing and China, I don't think about winter games at all.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of winter sport there. History, as I said, they have a bit of the aerials in the skiing. But that's kind of ties into the gymnastics diving history there. Yeah. It's a similar sports, but not in terms of like the alpine events and that. When was the last time you saw a Chinese downhill racer, right? Like they're just not really there. Yep. They developed them oftentimes for the games, and we have a few years yet before we have to worry about that. But at any rate, let's take a segue out. There's no natural segue to this one, but we're going to talk about race walking now, and the race walking story, which we talked about with Evan a few weeks ago.
Well, if you want to thread water really lightly, there can always be a segue between how Russia controlled doping allegedly a couple decades ago, and China did as well. So who knows?
There you go. We'll have the lawyers on speed dial after that. But
that's what I said allegedly.
Yeah. All right. Kevin, why don't you tell the listeners what's happening today in terms of that story that we talked about a couple weeks ago?
A couple weeks ago, we talked about Viktor Chagin. He still is, by the way, the Saransk head coach of race walking, Saransk in Russia, which is the national training center for the race walk. There's been a doping controversy. A lot of banned athletes have been training there. And the IAAF Federation, which is an athletics federation for the entire world, the governing body, is investigating Viktor Chagin right now for organized doping participation and facilitating doping and putting athletes that are banned in competition. So the investigation is going on right now. Very serious. If he's known guilty, he could be banned forever. It could be a lifetime ban if he's known to be guilty of those charges. So who knows? Justice might come in a couple of weeks from now. But at least it's a good sign that after the great investigative work that Evan Dunphy did to raise those flags, people have got behind him. People in the right places of the anti-doping world agency and the Russian one and the one that covers race walking. Well, they almost did it. Now it's in the hands of the IAAF for whatever that's worth.
This is the coach we're talking about?
Yes, the actual coach of the Saransk Center, the head coach of the Russian Race Walking Federation.
Okay, well, that's interesting too, because ultimately the coach has a lot of power. For those to localize this and not make it just about the Big Bad East. Those that remember the Ben Johnson saga and how that played out will know the name Charlie Francis, which was Ben Johnson's coach, the coach of the Optima Track and Field Club at the time, which is a Toronto-based track club that produced a lot of great sprinters, a lot of really fast sprinters, which turned out that they were artificially fast because it was widespread allegation. Even at the time, I mean, this is back. I'm gonna make people roll their eyes maybe here, but I at a very much lower level was running track and field around the same time of the peak of the Optima track and field stuff, and there were whispers then, even at the local level races, that the people that were involved with that track club were not necessarily on the up and up, like if you went to like a regional event and stuff. So this happens all over the world, and Charlie Francis was in fact he was disqualified, he was suspended, he's now dead, so we can say anything we want about Charlie. At any rate, so it just doesn't just happen in Russia, is what I'm saying. Yeah. So it is not unheard of to go after the coach because the coach just has an undue influence in a lot of cases on the athletes. Are you hearing anything in the stories today about the athletes themselves that were involved? Or are they going to extend those suspensions?
No, what I heard is strictly concerning the coach and the federation investigating him. I think they're going to try to get the head honcho, and that the head of the allegedly organized race walking, not just doping, but the hiding of the proof, or more a cover-up story of the doping scandals themselves. So both of them could be really damaging to that center. If the head coach is banned forever, that could be really dangerous. I still take it with a grain of salt, because we've seen those sanctions been applied to some Russian coaches in the past, and unfortunately did not have the result that we all expected it would have.
Yeah, we'll continue to follow this one. Just quickly to follow up on the Charlie Francis, he coached 32 world records. He was also Tim Montgomery and Miriam Jones' coach for a while. So this is a fellow that had a pretty dodgy history at times. But at any rate, as I said, I just wanted to put his name out there because I didn't want people to think we were picking on other parts of the world. This has happened right in my own back door. I can look out my window and see where Charlie Francis used to be coaching, right? So there you go. It
has nothing to do with the nationality of the scandal itself. It just has to do with the integrity of sports.
Yeah, and I don't think we're ever going to fully get that cleaned up, but we've taken big steps. And on that note, Kevin, let's talk about more pleasant things. We'll take a quick break. We're going to come back, and we're going to set up our flag bearer conversation for next week by talking about the Canadian flag bearers, our ultimate summer and winter opening and closing ceremony flag bearers.
I've always wanted to ask that question of flag bearer, and in the hindsight, we saw your performance. Did you think that it actually helped you, or hindered you a little bit?
It didn't help or hurt me, but every Olympics, I was fortunate enough that the schedule allowed me to march in the opening ceremony, so I was able to do all 4 ceremonies. If I was racing within a day or two, I definitely would have had to consider it. But I wanted to prove people wrong, that there was no flag jinx, that even though I'd carried it, it didn't matter. But when it came down to it, the opening ceremony is I find very uplifting and very inspiring, because you go back and talk about why the Olympics are there, and when you see the flame come in, it's about the world coming together, and I really like that symbolism. So to me, every opening ceremony was always very inspiring, and it was just a little bit of an added bonus that I carried the flag, but that sort of didn't affect my skating either way.
And welcome back. And as I said in the intro, it was the 50th anniversary of the introduction of the Canadian flag that is world known now, the maple leaf on the red and the white. Before that, if you want to look up Red Ensign, you can get a bit of a history of the flag and all that happened there. It was very controversial, actually, at the time. There was a divide between
Diefenbaker and
the conservative forces wanted to maintain links to the UK in the image of the flag. They wanted to have some of the old flags. It's funny, if you want to look, there's crazy old designs that just look crazy in terms of what we currently ended up with. But at any rate,
a lot of blue back then in the designs too. That always surprised me.
Yeah, well, that's the think about the parties involved. The Diefenbaker was conservative, and the Conservative Party here in Canada is traditionally has blue as their color. So a lot of the flags they put forward had blue and red on them, whereas the Liberals traditionally have red as their color, and the Liberals were in power, so it was a red and white flag that ended up winning the day. But it's an iconic image now. I don't think any of us can imagine much different. But we're venturing into the Sheldon Cooper territory here with the talking about flags. If you want a Big Bang reference there, but we're going to move away from that and get back to sport. How I wanted to tie this in is I wanted to have an overall conversation about our ultimate all-time flag bearers. We're going to ultimately do it for several countries, but we're going to set it up today by talking about the one that Kevin and I are most familiar with, that being Canada. Before we get into this, in my mind, there's a difference between what an opening ceremony flag bearer is and what a closing ceremony flag bearer is, at least the way that it's usually been traditionally given out here in Canada. And to me, that difference is the opening one is more about past success. It's purely kind of black and white. You are a leader and you are someone who has won before. Whereas the closing ceremony is a little more about intangibles. And there's just a difference there. So that's kind of how I divided that. So we're going to pick a summer and a winter opening and closing flag bearer each, Kevin and I for Canada, and then we'll sort of just discuss a little bit. You've listened to the podcast long enough. You know how we do those things, right? So anyway, Kevin, let's start with the summer, and I'll start with you, and we'll start with the opening ceremony.
I took a boy from my neck of the woods, a boy from the Quebec region, a judoka who, when I was a kid, he looked like a beast. He looked like a unsurmountable force that was on those tatami. He looked like a danger. He had the look of a grizzled old veteran judoka. Those cauliflower ears, broken nose many times. Those tough men. That's what he looked like. Nicola Gill. He just looked like a beast, and he had the opening ceremony, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I know he did, but I just can't remember the precise year. But he was, for me, he was a dominant force in his sport, always coaching, to this day, coaching the young generation. He was the national coach for Canada, but he was the first foreign to be coach in Japan, too. So he was a gaijin coaching in Japan judo, so which is almost unheard of ever in the history of judo. So he always had a great impression on me with that sport, and one of the reasons why I chose him for one of my favorite summer flag bearer ever.
Okay, and I think that he won his medals in Sydney, and he was the flag bearer in Athens, I believe. He had we had Lemedo off the top. He wasn't able to fulfill her. He's a little further on in his career too, and he was less likely of a gold medal favorite as she was. But he sort of spoke to, at that time they used to talk about the gold medal, the jinx here in Canada, the flag bearer jinx, and he wasn't able to repeat after he had held the flag up. But at any rate, certainly a guy that is represented as a coach and an athlete for a lot of years. A little bit of controversy for Nicholas at one point when he made some comments that we're not going to get into here around nationalism and that, but everyone's entitled to their opinion, and he's certainly represented the flag when he wore it, so I'm not going to get into that, but we'll mention it because I know our listeners would tell me if I didn't. My opening ceremony one is a little bit more, I don't think he was a closing ceremony flag bearer at one point, but he wasn't ever an opening ceremony flag bearer from my memory off the top of my head, but certainly a guy that maybe has reached the highest pinnacle in recent years, in the last 25 years or so of Olympic glory. To me, there is no other Olympic gold medal that is more worldly known, more important than what this man won, and he also won a second one, which is one of my favorite Canadian gold medals of all time. I am, of course, talking about the fastest man in the world in 1996, Donovan Bailey. I simply picked him because that is the biggest event of the Olympics, the Summer Olympics. This is a 100-meter final, and a Canadian won it, and he won it at a time when Ben Johnson was still fresh and when the pressure around that was still there. So I think that is why I went with Donovan Bailey.
And it's a great choice. Donovan Bailey, legend in Oakville. He was probably the fastest man Canada ever produced. Just ask Michael Johnson.
He also started a chain of restaurants called Filthy McNasty's, which had this great dessert called Banana Blast. But they're no longer around. So anyway.
I've been there once. Then they're all closed.
Oh, it was banana bread. soaked overnight in caramel sauce, and with bananas on it and vanilla ice cream on the top with then caramel spread on top of that. It was divine at any rate.
I can totally agree with you. I had it once.
I don't think you can run the 100-meter very quickly after you eat that. However, I could eat it as quickly as Donovan could run the 100 meters. So at any rate, I have a bit of a sweet tooth.
A sugar-induced coma is more likely than a 100-meter win after eating that dessert.
So that reason alone, I'd make it my ultimate. No, to be serious, winning the 100 meters is like it's it. That's 10 seconds. It's the best 10 seconds in sport. You know, the whole. It is, I think, my favorite sporting moment in any sport anywhere is that hush that goes over a crowd of 80,000 just before the gun goes off for the 100-meter final. It's just the tension. It's everything sport is if you love sport, and that's always been mine. And I love the sprints, and I would love to see Canada get back in the sprint game. But even if they're not, I'm still going to be – whatever time of day, wherever it is in the world, I will be watching it very, very closely.
Yeah, it's relatable to everybody. It's one of the only sports in the entire world where everybody looked at one of their friends first and be like, okay, we start here, we finish at this point, let's see who's the fastest. That's what it was on a world level. It's mind-boggling when you think about it that way.
Yeah, quickly as an aside, it just popped in my head. Usain Bolt did actually announce this past week, we probably should have mentioned this, that he is going to retire after the World Championships after Rio. So in 2017 he will be retiring. So he's going for the ultimate, the three-peat. That's never been done before. It'll be very interesting to see whether Bolt can do that. But at any rate, that's a different topic, and maybe we'll talk more about him when the summer season starts again, obviously. Kevin, let's move to the closing ceremony for the summer. Who did you peg for that?
For the closing ceremonies for the Summer Olympic, a name that it's really recent. It's in I was going to say Beijing. No, it's in London. Christine St. Clair, who had the flag bearer, just representing a team, something that was almost never achieved in the history of Canada, winning a medal in a team sport at the Summer Olympics. It was a great moment, and Christine St. Clair was probably the porte-parole, the namesake of that team, and she deserved to represent it that way.
Absolutely. Christine Sinclair was the face of the London Olympics here in Canada. It wasn't actually, the London Olympics were more successful than we remember them. It's a bit of a frustration with the lack of gold medals we weren't on. We would have been talking a lot about the gold medal drought. Mm-hmm. Only Rosie, the trampolinist, managed to break that one. But certainly the women's soccer team became the rallying point, the big story that remained at those games. A bronze medalist there. There's a lot of luck involved in that run. This is a team that I can't really talk about without getting into great detail sometimes because I cover them very, very closely.
Cinderella story. We have to admit it. It was a Cinderella story. Yeah,
absolutely. They got out of their group as a third place finisher. They got a draw against Team UK in the quarterfinals. They were able to win that game fairly handily. It was their best game of the tournament. Played the U.S. in an epic battle, which the U.S. won in the semifinals. It was very controversial. The referee made a terrible refereeing decision that absolutely benefited the U.S. to a great deal. Canada, in fairness, has never beaten – no, I shouldn't say never. They've only beaten the U.S. 3 times all time, and that was the day they showed up. They were the better team on the play. Christine Sinclair had a hat trick that day. It was really an incredible performance all around. Unfortunately, the U.S. ended up winning in extra time. And then the bronze medal game, kind of like the football gods paid Canada back because France dominated them in that game. Oh, yeah. But then the very last dash, the last kick almost of the tournament for Canada, they scored and won 1-0 to capture a bronze medal.
And yep, it's a topical reference too because between you and me, France is going to have a heck of a summer on the football pitch in the women's side.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about this women's football in the days ahead. France, they beat the U.S. 2-0 in a friendly and were absolutely dominant this past little while. They are a team on the upscale. I think they are the best women's team in the world right now. So for Canada to beat them, it was Dinah Matheson, by the way, that scored the last second goal. She's a midfielder for Canada that's currently injured, and they're going to need her back if they're going to do something at home this year. But at any rate, France is my pick to win the World Cup this year. But to get back to the Christine Sinclair, yeah, it's a maybe Outside of the hockey players, which kind of get overlooked sometimes because we're so dominant in hockey, in fairness, but outside of the hockey players at the Olympics, maybe the most recognizable Olympic performance by a Canadian team member, team sport member in maybe history in those games. So an interesting and deserving choice there.
What is your closing summer ceremony favorite of all time?
Okay. Imagine a box. Kevin, a box, and I'll go way outside that box, way outside, like to another, like to Nova Scotia. Like that's how far I need you to go outside the box on this call of mine, Kevin. Okay.
Okay.
My outside the box pick is Mr. Richard Dick Pound, is my closing ceremony flag bearer for Canada. Now, the reason it's outside the box is because Dick Pound was never really an outstanding athlete. However, he was an outstanding sports administrator that very nearly got to the highest point of the Olympic movement. So I would like to, using the intangible aspect of this, recognize his accomplishments both as a sport administrator, as the second most powerful man in the IOC for many, many years, a man who was a bit of a reformer that wasn't able to take that final step to the IOC because he was too much of a reformer, that then moved his work to the anti-doping agency, created that, is a belligerent anti-doper. Some say too belligerent, but however, I don't know whether you can be in that. You have to be a true believer. Yeah, you have to see shadows everywhere in order to work in that world. He's then moved on, and now he's gone into a more commercial area where he's working on the TV side of things for the TV contracts worldwide for the IOC. So this is a lifetime IOC member that has stayed for the most part. I shouldn't say for the most part. As far as anyone knows, there is no allegations of Dick Pound being anything but above board. He has been a reformer for the Greco, a champion for the Olympic movement, someone that, although on the sporting side, for the record, he was in the 1960 Olympics. He was a Commonwealth champion, medalist anyway, competed for Canada in the 1960 Rome Olympics. But so he does meet the qualification that he was there as an athlete. So that is why he is my closing ceremony all-time Canadian Summer Olympic flag bearer.
If we're going to the opening ceremony for the Winter Games, for me, it's a personal highlight. It was my first big interview I ever did, the one that we listened to it off the top of the bumper here of this segment. Katrina Lemay-Doan. And I actually asked her the question, what is there an actual flag bearer jinx? What's the feeling being a flag bearer? It doesn't affect your performance. And with her being 15 years removed from her competition when we talked to each other, she was really open about all the feelings, that it did not affect her. It helped her in a way because she was able to get more focused and did not want to let that jinx happen. So it was really interesting to talk to her about it and to rewatch those moments. In 2002 in Salt Lake City, she was a flag bearer, but she won in 98. 2002, she had a great career, Olympic career since 94. So it was just great, and there's no other athlete in Canada history that surpasses her as a flag bearer for me for the opening ceremony. I still have in my head the images of her with her Roots beret, red beret on, with her white scarf and the red. You remember when Roots existed 14 years ago? And it was because of those Olympics, it did a resurface of the Roots brand. And it was just a magical time back then for Canada in 2002.
Yeah, well, actually, Roots is still around. I was in a Roots store here in Toronto recently, but it doesn't look anything like what you'd imagine Roots.
It wasn't like in 2002. There was an actual Roots store. There were 3 floors, 3 levels of the store. It doesn't exist anymore.
Although the old Beaver sweatshirts are making a comeback at any rate. I obviously she's a hero of a lot of Canadians and someone who's still very prominent on the TV. Often you'll see her in commercials. Sometimes you'll see her every Olympics, summer and winter. She's an iconic Canadian Olympian, one of the few that have repeated back-to-back. Absolute star. She broke that flag bearer jinx, so to speak, by winning the second time around. A lot of pressure there, multiple medals, just a champion in a way that few Canadian athletes up until then, because she predates On the Podium, which was a major shift in attitude in Canadian Olympic performances, the On the Podium program, which came in for 2010. She predates that and was still the type of champion that On the Podium. She's kind of the image of the athlete, her and Silken Lallman on the summer side. They're very similar looking athletes too, so it's kind of I always tie them into my head, but they're the type of like heroic athletes, the superstars, just competitors that I think On the Podium tried to emulate when they launched. I think they probably had those two women in mind. So she's a very deserving Winter Olympic opening ceremony flag bearer all time. My pick, Kevin, is very similar. It's also a female athlete. If you look at Canadians' Olympic history, the female side of things has been more successful, so it makes sense that we're tending towards them. Kaylee Humphries, back-to-back champion. The way that she came through, I know people sometimes look at the sledding sports and they dismiss them a little bit because they think that the sled matters a lot more than the athleticism, but I think that that's giving her a disservice. She's just an absolute stud of an athlete, for lack of a better way to put it. She's a beast. She will compete at every level. She's one of the most competitive athletes we've ever produced. She's in every way not the Canadian stereotype of the nice person next door that's going to be passive and et cetera, et cetera. She, in back-to-back Olympics, has come from behind to win the gold medal. She has now set her sights to challenging herself further on the four-man side of things by being a female pilot on the four-man bobsled. I do not discount the possibility of her becoming a three-time Olympic champion in a row in 3 years' time.
And that would not even be the end of her career, Duane. That's the thing. She's training part-time mixed martial art at the same time. Even it's hard to believe, but yes, it's true. She's a tough woman, and she's competing against men on those sleds, and eventually she's gonna compete against girls on a mat, competitive fighting. It's an interesting choice of career, but she's gonna continue to be on the public eye for, I think, for another decade. And she just scratched the surface of her being an athlete, I think.
I wonder if she's making a switch into MMA with the idea that she might follow Miss Hughes and be a summer and winter Olympian if MMA ever gets a look at the summer side of things. I don't think they need a lot of work would need to happen for mixed martial arts to make the summer games, but I wouldn't put it completely out of the question in an Olympics or so. So that might be part of her, but she probably just wants to compete. She just wants to be a computer. But at any rate,
make some money. We're not going to lie. To make some money out of it because she's a recognizable star. But it's still not easy career choices that she decided to do, and so far she's pulling off everything she is attempting. So,
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, she's. The athletes I tend to, I hate to use the word idolize, but to respect, I'll say, are the ones that are hyper competitive and just don't take crap for anything. They just they barrel ahead, and she absolutely represents. That's someone that I think we all can look up to. So that's why she was my Winter Olympic flag bearer. Let's move to the closing ceremonies winter side, and we'll start with you, Kevin.
1994, Lillehammer, Norway. Myriam Bédard won the biathlon. I think it was a bronze medal at a biathlon, but something we don't really see in Canadian history. And she was the flag bearer for those closing ceremony. And it was a great story back then because she never really achieved her full potential. We all know what happened after her career. We're just going to talk about her career. It doesn't matter what law problems she had after. We're not talking about this. Like about the girl on the skis with the gun. She was great. We talked about it before on the show. It's a sport that sparks the imagination because you don't see that often. It's a relic of the old trapping and hunting in the winter type of sport. So it's a great physical and mental focused type of sport. And she did a great performance. And she was one of the precursor to the type of athlete that you chose for your flag bearer clothing ceremony, which is probably the best athlete in the history of the country, I have to say, Duane.
Yeah, I'll talk about her in a second. Just quickly with Bedard, imagine what she did, and then imagine the type of support, like administrative coaching support that she had here in Canada, and then imagine
she had like almost none, right?
Yeah, she basically did it herself. There was very little. Biathlon Canada would have probably been, a secretary somewhere.
Yeah, like the president, the secretary, and her.
Yeah, like that would have been the sport at the time. There just was nothing there. And this is pre-own the podium. There weren't anything like that. The entire funding for Canadian athletes was something like $15,000 a year for an A card back then. It was just ridiculous to think that she went on to win 2 gold medals at the next Olympics, or a gold and a bronze, pardon me.
Yeah.
So the fact that she got that much, just basically doing it on her own, is incredibly remarkable. Had she grown up in Norway, you would have been talking about a multiple Olympic and world champion over the years, because the amount of support, the amount of coaching, the amount of high-tech technology that she would have had that would have just increased her abilities that were already incredible as they were. I think that it's just phenomenal to think about when you start to consider that side of things.
And 94 was a weird year, too, because it was only 2 years after the Albertville game, where Albertville in 1992, it was the 1 year where they trying to change things up and do two Winter Olympic Games in 2 years almost. So the whole preparation they usually set up for 4 years, the whole Olympic cycle was out of whack. So it's for those athletes that performed in 1994, there should be an asterisk or a little plus next to a medal, because it's out of how do you say? I was going to say out of touch, but it's not the right expression. It's something that is different than the other cycles, and they should be commended for that.
Yeah, I miss those cycles. They should go back to every 2 years, but that would probably make I'd be living by
the
myself.
product. Yeah,
yeah. I would never see the outside again. I'd just be sitting there staring at Olympic sites all day, because everyone who knows me knows how much I go into a cave during the Olympics. But at any rate,
your choice for, I was going to say for a closing ceremony, but in that case, we could say probably one of the best athletes in the history of this country.
Yeah. Anyone who's listened to this podcast over the years, or just listened to me over the years, knows exactly who I'm going with on this one. I almost was going to, when I set up this exercise, was almost about to tell you that I was going to eliminate her because it was just too obvious. But then, how could you? The closing ceremony flag bearer all-time winter, and you can make it for summer as well if you want, for all four she could get, is Clara Hughes. She's we've talked about her 100 times in the show already. This is a woman who's done things that no one else in the world did. She did them at an older age, an advanced age. She has more determination than any athlete I know. After her past, if you want to talk about the intangibles, this is why I put her on the closing side. She's a big proponent of right to play. It's done huge work there. She's front and center of the Bell Let's Talk, which
mental health awareness,
mental health awareness gets worldwide attention this year. She's just front and center to this day. I don't think, she's in her 40s now, but I am not convinced she couldn't make a comeback tomorrow and still be competitive to winning a medal.
Duane, last year she took her bike and she traveled across the country on her bike from coast to coast.
Yeah, this is to me the greatest female Canadian athlete of all time, and the only reason I put the gender on it is because the only person I would make equatable in terms of their accomplishment and what they've done for the world is a male by the name of Terry Fox, which basically created a lot of money for cancer research. For those, if you don't know who Terry Fox is, we're going to talk about him in September probably, but just to Google it, because you should know that story. But that's the only person I would put on the same level as Clara Hughes, and that is a very big statement for me to say. So at any rate, I don't know if I need to say any more about Miss Hughes. She is, I'm not going to hesitate the word to use, hero there. She is a hero.
And if you are a listener of the Five Rings podcast for a little bit, you know that I love short track speed skating, love long track speed skating, and I love cycling. And guess what? She was a cycling champion. She was a long track speed skating champion. And just great technically. And that's what I think one of the things is, she was never the most athletic person out there. She was not the fittest, but she was the most determined and one of the most technically sound. So those two factors together created a great career. And that, like you say, that determination sometimes is all you need to become a legend in any sport.
Absolutely. All right, the great Clara Hughes is I think that's kind of our ultimate flag bearer for everything. If we had to pick one, I think we're probably fair to say that, right?
Oh, yeah, we have to.
Okay. All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to talk about some other great female athletes. The Scotties Tournament of Hearts, the Canadian Curling Championship. We're going to wrap that field up. We're going to talk about that field and handicap it for the rest of the week. It's already started. We'll do that after this quick break.
Really tough shot. This could be the game here. Great opportunity, though. Five Rings final stone here in two. It's close. It's close. There's a run back. And there's the tap.
Duane talks about curling on the Five Rings podcast.
And a shot.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Jennifer Jones.
And welcome back, Hurry Hard. Here we are talking about the Scotties Tournament of Heart. As we said the last show when I broke down the Briar, the Scotties is maybe the best example of brand title sponsorship in this country that no one ever actually refers to it as the Canadian Women's Curling Championship. It's just called the Scotties after the toilet paper company. So,
but it's been the case for decades, because it was a Scotties Tournament of Hearts before it was a Scotties. It's just the company itself changed the branding of their own product. But it was, I remember when I was a kid, it was a Scotties Tournament of Hearts. It was the same, the blue circle with the 4 hearts inside in the middle of the pin. That was the button. That was the branding of it 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it today, making my daily God of my old moment was I realized that my solidifying moment of when I started to really follow elite level curling was in 1994. When I was living in Kitchener-Waterloo, and the Scott Tournament of Hearts, which as it was called then, was being held there in 1994, and it was called the Scott Tournament of Hearts for sure at that point. So that's my I'm old moment of the day. It's been 21 years that I've been following this stuff. Yikes. At any rate, so look, I'm not going to break like I did with the Briar. I'm going to highlight the big rinks. Basically, the tournament has already started. There are three rinks that are 3-0 right now. I was watching the 4th draw. It looked like Jen Jones was going to go 4-0 in that draw. She was the only one of the undefeated playing this morning in the early draw. It's in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, so there's 3 draws a day. You have a morning one, which is 10 o'clock Eastern time. It goes off. Then there's a mid-afternoon one. It's around 3, and then an evening draw. So they 3 draws a day all week. It's a round-robin situation. Like the men, they have a Team Canada, which has always been the case for the women.
Which is Jennifer Jones, right?
Yeah, no, it's Rachel Holman.
Okay.
Because Jen Jones did not participate in the national championship level last year. We're going to get into that a little bit more in a minute, because that is the big battle. Jen Jones won the Olympic trials and then just withdrew herself from the rest of the sort of that stream. She focused entirely on the Olympics last year, so she wasn't involved. Rachel Holman is the Ontario-based rink. She's brought Ottawa, young skip. She's only 25. She is basically the up-and-comer big face of the sport, and that is a big rivalry. However, right now it is, those 2 rinks plus the Alberta rink of Val Sweeting, pardon me. She is 3-0 as well. She was last year's runner-up. So that's where we are right now. To get back to the train, though, like they changed the format up, but we talked about it on the men's side of things. There was a pre-qualifying event this year. It was the first time it took place. The reason they did that is because they wanted to add Northern Ontario as its own rink. In the past, it hasn't been on the women's side. It had only been on the men's side. Part of the thinking was they wanted to reduce the cost associated to some of the isolated arenas, because Northern Ontario, for those that don't know the geography of it, you might as well be going like 7-8 nations in Europe, right? Like it's a lot of traveling for those rinks up there.
It was a 24-hour drive, 13, 14-hour drive at least.
Yeah, the rinks from Thunder Bay that won. So to compete in Toronto for that title, you'd be looking at, it's a full day's drive or a flight, so it's not cheap. And then the other side of it was the territories that they used to have. The Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut would have a champion be crowned, and then they would play against each other in a sort of Arctic championship, a Pan-Arctic championship, and the winner would represent the Northwest Territories, Yukon in the final event. So that they eliminated that. They just wanted to have the local bombspiels, basically in Yellowknife and Whitehorse, to declare champions up there and then invite them down with the support of the Canadian Curling Association, so there's less travel costs associated, and then give them an opportunity, at least in that area, to try and play into it. So they did that this year. There were 2 rinks that were eliminated, happened to be the northern rinks. It was the Yukon and the Northwest Territories that were eliminated in the mini bombspiel that happened at the start. Northern Ontario was also involved with that. They advanced. Are actually doing pretty well in the draw. They're 2-2 right now. So they, it makes sense that they would get through. The only reason they were involved is because they don't have a history. They don't have a record, so they're not going to qualify for the next 3 years. They're going to have to go through that way because they're not going to have a record to be in that 3-year lowest amount of wins sort of territory. I suppose if it's total amount of wins over 3 years, they might be able to bypass one of those ranks if they have a good bombspiel. But at any rate, that happened this year. It's a bit of a controversial thing. Some people don't like it. People don't like change, especially in a world that's kind of been the same forever. The rinks involved were very diplomatic about it. The Northwest Territories woman, she said, I'm just happy and privileged that I had the opportunity to go down and have the chance to get into this. And she was very diplomatic, even though she didn't get to go on, only got to play 3 games. So it's going to take time for it to adjust, but I think that it's all part of the evolution of the sport, where it's becoming more and more competitive and less campy like it used to be in the past. It's nice that we're giving these. Like we talked about it, how it's like the FA Cup in the sense that it's a truly open competition, but it's weird that to qualify out of Ontario is incredibly competitive, but to qualify out of the Yukon is like winning your local arena, right? Yeah. So it'd be like having the FA Cup with regions, where one of the regions only had teams in the football conference and the other region only had teams in the Premier League, right? It's kind of
that's why there's a round robin, if I'm not mistaken, as well, in the final event of the tournament, because that way the true better team will win at the end and not just out of one game.
Yeah, well, it's page playoff. Yeah, it's a page playoff. So the way it works is that the top 4 teams will make it. Instead of they have a competitive tie-breaking process. So any team that has the same amount of wins for that 4th place, they will play each other in a drawed way to make sure that you're actually winning the right to advance on the ice. So then you have the 1st place and 2nd place team will play. It's similar to the Australian playoff format that you see in a lot of sports here. So the 1st and 2nd place team will play each other in a game. The winner of that will advance directly to the final. The loser of that is not eliminated. Instead, they will play the winner of the 3rd and 4th place playoff game to advance to the final. So basically, you have 2 chances to advance to the final in the playoffs if you finished in the top 2. So I like that format. I actually think it's one of the fairest playoff formats that are out there. I know we have an MLS podcast where I've talked about that as would be my preferred MLS playoff bracket. Of course, it would probably still, people are so weird and conservative, they would go, oh, you lose and you still go on. Anyway.
Galaxy will still win at the end anyways.
Oh, probably, yeah. They'll have 12 DPs. But anyway, we digress. So that's the playoffs. Interesting stories. We're getting a little bit all over the map here in the conversation. But
what are the skip that are very... interesting to look at. Not look at. Sometimes, yes, that's what I mean. But to take a look at the team.
Yeah, look, there are 4 ranks. It's not as club, not as overall. There's not as much parity, is what I'm trying to say, in the women's side of things. I think there are more super ranks in this that are more likely to win. I would point to it being highly likely that this will be a Jen Jones-Rachel Holman final. As I said, they are undefeated right now. These 2 ranks represent the future and the present and the past of the game in a perfect way. You have Jen Jones, who's 40 this year, Olympic champion last year. We talked a lot about her last year, or in the early part of this podcast, especially in the Sochi days. She's the champion there. She is, represents the past of the sport and the success of the past of the sport. And she's sticking around to I don't know what her competitive goals are. I have a theory on that, but I might touch it in a minute. But then you have Rachel Holman, who is a world junior champion, who's only 25, which is very young to be a skip. She's absolutely on that new athletic sort of side of the games. It's a little more image savvy. Mm-hmm. You'll see her on posters. You'll see her in calendars. Attractive young woman, all that sort of stuff. Then even on, Jen Jones has Caitlin Laws as well as her 3rd, which is, I think, the real feature of this game as well. If you open up the Scotties Tournament of Hearts website, it's her face is all over the place, and that's a 3rd, right? So this speaks to sort of that image-conscious, athletic sort of present of the sport and future of the sport. So it's an interesting battle. It's one of the best rivalries that's going on in Canadian sport right now. Holman is the future. She is probably the hands-on favorite to represent Canada in South Korea. Okay. Jen Jones will be 43 by the time South Korea rolls around. You imagine that Laws is who she is framing to try and take over her rink when she's done. She is a little bit older than the other 3 women that are in the rink. So if you put Laws in there as a skip and put in a new person in the 3rd spot, that might be what their ultimate goal is. But it's just going to be a lot of battles between these 2 in the days ahead. The one reason I talked about what Jen Jones' competitive goals might be, and at 40, Olympic champion, multiple Canadian championships, world championships, it's still a sport that involves a lot of moving around in the winter. She has a young child. You have to question that. She has a partner it's a live-in partner that she's had the child with that is actually competing competitively for another province. You have to ask yourself how long she's going to go on. And the main reason I suspect that she's continuing is, I said in the men's side, that it's the same as on the women's side. The Continental Championship, the tour events are tripling in money over the next few years. I mean, Jen Jones has competed for the last 20 years. She's been the face of the sport in a lot of ways in an era where it has been generally amateur or semi-pro. We're moving into an era where it will be professional, and she might be sticking around, and you can't blame her for this, partially to cash in on that she deserves a little bit of piece of that if she can stay competitive for the next couple of years. I can't imagine, though, that she has an Olympic gold medal repeat in mind as a 43 turning 44-year-old. That's it's a sport that you can compete a little later on in life, but at the same time, when you get up to that age, as we've talked about before, the athleticism is important in the sport too, and it is a bit of a stretch. So,
and not just that, I think the trend that you talked about, how the sport is becoming more athletic in a way, 4 years down the road, or 3.5 years down the road now, it will be the case. It will be a different type of sport, and across the board, the skips are getting younger. On the men's side, but on the women's side especially. If you're looking at the Nordic countries, the Norway, Sweden, they all have young team that's been together for a long time already. And in 2018, it's going to be hard to beat and have a three-peat for Germany, for Jennifer Jones.
And if you look at the Asian rinks, too, the Asian rinks, they basically started from scratch. So they have picked 19-year-olds that they've identified as being potential champions in the sport, and they have been molding them. And to the point that by the time South Korea rolls around, those Asian rinks are going to be real contenders in this sport. Another older rink I wanted to touch on real quick, and they are a dark horse, I would suggest, although it would be quite a story if they were to win it, is the Ontario rink. They're actually from my neck of the woods, although I'd be lucky to share their postal code because it's a little bit above my rent zone. But Julie Hastings is from the Bayview Golf and Country Club. She was the runner-up in the Ontario Championship in 1995 to go to the Scotties. She never advanced there. She has been very competitive and playing in the cash spiels and all those sort of things through the years, but has never quite been on the national level. She's had the same team together for all of those years. For 20 years now, this same team has existed. They have never been to a Scotties. They have never been at a national level. They won the Ontario Championship this year for the first time. 20 years, almost exactly 20 years after they were in the final to get there, they finished the job and got back, and they are competing as a group that has been together for that long, and that's really remarkable in this sport in this era, and it speaks to sort of more of the community level of the situation. So I think that's an interesting story, and she won Ontario, so this is a good rank. They have a chance. I would put her as a dark horse. I touched on the Alberta rink. Alberta's always very good at this. Sweden, I would say that would be your other dark horse, but it will be an upset if one of Jen Jones or Rachel Holman does not win this competition.
What's the expression? She's an overnight sensation, 20 years in the making. Yeah,
and if you watch the TSN broadcast of this, and those outside of Canada may not realize that this is completely televised live on TSN.
Every single draw is live.
Yeah, you can watch it 3 times a day, on 4 channels 3 times a day. At any rate, they are playing that story up a lot, and it is a nice story, and you can understand why they might. But that's where we are. We will, if you follow the Five Rings podcast Twitter feed, I will be updating it a little bit with some updates on this throughout the week. If you're interested in that, if you're in Canada, just turn on TSN and you get some better coverage than that. But if you're outside of that, just follow me. Follow the Five Rings podcast. You should be following us anyway, and I'll update it here and there with my observations and my reporting on what's going on. Kevin, on that note, I think I'll let you say goodbye.
Until next week, where we'll talk about our favorite flag bearers for different countries. A little bit of a winter performance wrap up. In the last couple of weeks, there have been some world championship in the long track, short track speed skating, in figure skating, and other different sport as well. Mass start speed skating. Anyways, we'll talk about that next week. And until then, well, stay bottled up. It's cold, and on your podium.
Cheers.